Based Leadership Principles to Practices. My name is Gareth Holebrook. Start with the end in mind. Famous phrase from Stephen Covey and Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm not sure how many of you have read that book. It's brilliant, very powerful book. That's Stephen Covey on the right-hand side. And when researching his next book, which is The Eighth Habit, which is largely about find your inner voice and enable other people to find their voice. He was researching that book and he learned about the USS Santa Fe. So he got in touch with the captain of the Santa Fe, which is the gentleman on the left there, which is David Marquet. And he is the hero of this story because he was given the Santa Fe after being training up for the USS Olympia for a year. He was suddenly told, unfortunately, the captain of the Santa Fe has left suddenly, and so you're being reassigned to the Santa Fe. The problem was it was a different ship to what he was used to, and it was also a poor performing ship. And it was his leadership approach that Stephen Covey was really fascinated with, because within a year it became from the worst performing ship in the fleet to the best performing ship in the history of the Navy by demonstrable measures. Every few years you get people riding on board, inspecting the ship, and in every measure it outperformed every other ship. So Covey needed to understand why. So to start with the end in mind is this here, the ladder of leadership. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to do this presentation today and would like to upload it to YouTube is in the last week I've seen this being discussed quite a lot and a little bit of a misunderstanding about what this means. Traditionally, people would be in a permission-based culture. So think of Henry Ford, lots of line operators, they'd be right at level one. Tell me what to do, boss. I'm not paid to think. And where we want to ideally be at is a culture of intent, which is level 5, which is I intend to. This ladder is split between the bottom 4, which is seeking permission, and the top 2, which is asking for forgiveness. And there's a sweet spot right in between, which is intent. And as leaders, what we can do is through language, ask the right questions to help people climb that ladder and optimally get to the point where they can say, you're the boss, you're still accountable for this decision being made, but I've done the thinking, I've done the heavy lifting for you. And so this is what I see, this is what I think, and I'd like to do this. Therefore, by this time, this is what I intend to do. If we go to level 6, it's beyond the safety point where the leader can then give additional information or coaching. And so there is somewhat of a hazard there. So the phrase is strive for 5, 6 is too late to fix. So that's where we're going to end up with the ladder of leadership. And I'll come back to that as the very last slide. But that's where we're trying to get to. Before that, let's talk about Nightmare on Oscars Night. This is a bit of fun. We have loads of case studies which are tragedy, people die, huge environmental disasters, huge corporate disasters. This was a disaster, but only for the reputation of our main protagonists, who are Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. And of course, it's a PricewaterhouseCoopers production. 2017, it was the 50th anniversary of Bonnie and Clyde. So for Best Picture, Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway were asked to present the last card of the night, the most prestigious card, Best Picture. There were 5 nominations. One was La La Land, and the other was Moonlight. The way it works is there's 5,000 votes, but in the Academy, only PwC partners who are involved in this know who are the winners. So it's really tightly bound, really secret. There's 2 stacks of cards with identical cards because presenters go either stage left or stage right. So for Best Actress, which is the penultimate award, Leo DiCaprio came on, he had the card, and he announced Emma Stone, La La Land. And Emma Stone came up, thanks her family, thanks her agent, so on and so forth. And there she is backstage. And our villain of the story tonight is one Brian Cullinan. You can see him there on Twitter, 9:05 p.m. And he's already got 33 likes and 21 retweets. and he's tweeting, taking a picture of Emma Stone. Unfortunately, he should have been given Warren Beatty the correct card. Instead, he gave him the duplicate of Best Actress. Then Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway went on the stage, and they read out who the best picture would be, but they spent 5 minutes going through the nominees, and ultimately before he read the card out. Let's see what happens when he reads the card out.
And the Academy Award for Best Picture.
You're impossible. Come on. La La Land. La La Land has 14 Oscar nominations this year and is tied for the most nominated movie in Oscar history, winning 7 Oscars: production design, cinematography, original score, song, directing, actress, and Best Picture.
Thank you all. Thank you to the Academy. Thank you to Lionsgate. Thank you to our incredible cast and crew. We're all up here right now.
Matt Pluff, you kicked this off, and Damien Chazelle, we're standing on your shoulders. We lost, by the way, but, you know.
Guys, I'm sorry. No, there's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
Moonlight won.
So it was Moonlight. Let's just play it a little bit more.
This is not a joke.
This is not a joke. I'm afraid they read the wrong thing.
This is not a joke. Moonlight has won Best Picture. Moonlight, Best Picture.
So, quick question for everybody here, and Theory, because I can't see the chat channel here, if you wouldn't mind just reading out. Hop on the chat channel or speak up. What is the probability that Warren knows it's the wrong card? So he's looking at the card, and what's on his mind in probability? So is it 10% likely in his mind that this is the wrong card, or 90% likely? So just for a few seconds, what do you think?
I think he was definite that it was a wrong card because the way he was looking at the card showed that he wasn't sure if it's the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. So he looked in the envelope, he looked back at the card, he looked backstage, then he looked again in the envelope to see if there was another card. He couldn't believe it. And also you might have noticed Faye Dunaway was giving him the elbow saying, "You're impossible, come on." And the backstory to this was during rehearsals, apparently there was some friction between the two actors. And Warren ended up storming off. So there was some level of distrust between the two of them. What else do people say? What do you think? So Chris, you think 90%? So yeah, you're both saying, Dave, you think, yeah, 95%. Yeah, I think it's fair to say, if we go to the next slide, let's go to the next slide. Look at him, look down, look away. He looks backstage. He wants somebody to help him. But the problem was, he's got the information, but he has no authority to stop the Oscars. He's also in that dilemma that if he stopped the Oscars and it was the right card, well, he's going to look silly. And you want to look good. I mean, look how much he wants to look good. He's even wearing a tux. So he's under time pressure. The Oscars is very rigid with how long things take, military precision. He's got this card. He has no authority to stop. And nobody who does have the authority can see the information. So he's there out alone. And even Faye Dunaway, he passes it to her and she just reads the card. There you go. Who's Warren looking for here? The controller in the backstage, the producer, they don't know it's the wrong card. Nobody knows. Nor does Brian from PwC. So the first principle, and at the end I'm going to share with you all 6 principles, but it's about pushing authority to information. We know this from the Toyota production system, we want the factory workers to be able to innovate and to give feedback on how it's actually working at the Gemba, at the work. And we know whenever there's a problem in production, the managers are expected to go to the work. It's called Genji Genbutsu, so real work, real place. So managers are expected to go to the work. Rather than have reports pushing up the pyramid, we want to give authority pushing towards the people doing the work. This is a really important concept, and it is at odds with the way we've traditionally worked. So this is the way we've traditionally worked. And I've got to tell you, Theory was up in Singapore and Penang a few weeks ago, and the client there had a pre-look at the manufacturing clients had a look at the slide deck and said, "Oh, they're not sure about this picture because this is not the way we work anymore." And of course, it isn't. 30 years ago, when I first left the Navy, I did work in a factory not dissimilar from this as an electronics assembly person. That was my first job out of the Navy. But this picture here is from the 1930s. It's a radio factory in Philadelphia. And I've taken the time to count how many people are up there in that picture, and it's over 100. I think it's 104, I could see. How many people there do you think are doing thinking work out of the 100 or so? What do you think?
One.
One. Yeah, Chris. The one person I see is a draftsman there, or an engineer or a foreman. And it's one person who's doing the thinking and everyone else doing the doing. And this is traditionally how Henry Ford set up his Michigan plant, Highland Park in Michigan for the Model T. And it was based on Frederick Taylor's work on industrial management from pig iron in Chicago and how we can control industrial assembly by having each part broken down into constituent parts and then control through efficiency. That worked spectacularly well in the 1940s and before. But the way we work today is we do get paid to think as well as getting paid to do. Bluntly, we can call this red work and blue work. So red work is the execution, doing the work. And that, even if you're an IT professional, that's maybe restarting the server, uploading a patch, doing a deployment, that repeated control things that we just do all of the time, and you don't need to think about, and you control the variation. But then we have blue work. This is where we make decisions, we assess, we analyze. So the red work, execute, deliver, produce, consistent, standard, and blue work is decide, discuss, plan, develop, choose. And it used to be that some people were blue workers and most people were red workers. And so we'd have an org structure that would look something like this. And all the decisions are made at the top and all of the action is at the bottom. And there's a huge distance between the two. This is especially so in United States companies, less so in New Zealand and Australia, but you'd have maybe the head office in New York, the factory in Seattle, and engineering is in Santa Monica or something like that. So people would be geographically distant from one another. But actually, that's still the case here as well. So we notice there's still a legacy to our language. Even though we work in tech, most of us, or we don't work in factories anymore, we still have all hands meetings. We have direct reports. You hear can-do attitude and leaders and followers. And you hear from this blue language from the managers, let's get it done, keep going, you need to. Any questions, keep focused. Then can I, this isn't working, when do we, what happens if? So this on that ladder of leadership is very much at the bottom rung, a permission-based culture. You don't make any action until you're given permission to do that action, and you wait for future instruction. So here's David again on the Santa Fe. As I said, he was spent a year learning everything about the USS Olympia. But the Santa Fe, a newer version of the Los Angeles class Hunter killer submarine, and was about to deploy in 6 months, and he didn't have time to learn. In fact, a few weeks after joining the ship, they went to sea. And this is what he was taught in the Navy Academy. This is the definition of leadership, and it's still in this book. Leadership can be defined as the art, science, or gift by which a person is enabled and privileged to direct the thoughts, plans, and actions of others in such a manner as to obtain their command, their obedience, their confidence, their respect, and their loyal cooperation. Now, I want to ask all of you, can we direct the thoughts of other people? Have you ever known that to happen? I think of one example, Ben Kenobi, they aren't the droids you're looking for. Apart from that, people have independent thought, and people are most motivated when they have agency and can think for themselves. So this is what David believed when he joined the Navy. First day underway. This is a Santa Fe, and this is the battery powered the battery motors on the submarine. So it's a nuclear powered submarine. But they ran an exercise that the reactor went offline, and then they had a few hours to get the reactor back online before the battery is drained. And actually, this is the Olympia because you can see it's at stop, and you've got ahead a third, ahead two-third, and standard full ahead. And Marquet gave the command ahead two-thirds on the Olympia. And his executive officer, who had been on the ship for 2 years, said, "Aye, aye, sir, ahead two-thirds." And then nothing happened. And Marquet asked the Tillerman, Garcia, there he is. He froze. And Marquet said, "Seaman Garcia, what's going on?" And he said, "Sir, on this submarine, there is no two-thirds. There's only a one-third and full ahead." So Marquet went to his executive officer and said, "Did you know this?" "Yes, sir, I did." "Why do you think he issued the order when he knew that there wasn't a head two-thirds?"
Well, so in the book, he said that he thought there was some secret that he'd learned at captain school.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
he
I
knew
don't know.
something that he didn't, it was like
Yeah, I
greater
trust
knowledge.
you. You're the captain. You know everything about this submarine. I'm going to follow your orders. And he knew this was a deadly combination because he didn't know there wasn't. It was different sonar systems on board this ship, and he really didn't know the systems. He could usually lean over, almost hit the different buttons over the shoulder of the sonar operators, but he didn't know this ship, and that became a problem. So the whole essence of Turn the Ship Around, which obviously Chris you've read, is that very rapidly he thought, well, the ship know the ship better than I do. And the best way for me to lead is allow people to propose what they think is the best course of action, and then for me to become the evaluator of those decisions and not the ultimate decision maker. And that took a great deal of humility. It meant he had to reframe and have a complete paradigm shift of what leadership really is, because it's not about knowing everything and telling everything, because he just didn't know. So he wrote that book. It was a big bestseller. It's 12 years old now. And then 5 years ago, he wrote the second book, Leadership is Language, which is, of the two, my favorite. Leadership is Language, because I think it's much more applicable to business. It uses some case studies in business, and it uses a particular case study of the Alfaro, which is a container ship which sank in the Caribbean. Chris, have you read Leadership is Language?
Yeah, I think it's the best. Genuinely, it's the book I recommend more than anything else
Yeah.
to people when we talk. So I think it's amazing. He never uses it. Psychological safety is a really sort of trendy term, as it were, and because of Dr. Amy Edmondson's work with Project Aristotle at Google and all the rest of it. And I think that book gives you psychological safety and how to lead in its pages. It's amazing. It's
Yeah.
like a truly practical guide.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. And his third book is out in a few months as well, called Distancing, which I've read a draft of, and it's fantastic as well. But I really, really like that book. Okay, so if Warren knows it's the wrong card, why doesn't he stop the Oscars? Well, Chris, you've mentioned psychological safety. He doesn't feel safe to speak out. There's no mechanism there. Um, he he was given the nudge. He was under time pressure, which I know, Dave, you're going to be asking later about the safety context. If we're always under time pressure, there's a risk of safety issues. And other case studies, people freeze and don't make decisions, and that causes safety events. And we can see him looking backstage there. And this is what he's thinking. Well, I just want to get off stage. Faye Dunaway's giving me heat. Uh, I'm on stage. I'm supposed to look good. Tick tock, tick tock. I've got the card there. It does say La La Land. It was one of the nominees. So you can kind of, maybe there was a cognitive dissonance that he didn't believe his eyes. he didn't believe he could possibly have the wrong card. And even though it says best actress, if you can just see the poor text there, maybe he didn't have his reading glasses on and it didn't compute, but he didn't believe it not to be true. But he didn't feel safe speaking up. He couldn't. What we say in the Toyota production system is to pull the andon cord to stop the clock, and he just wasn't safe to do so. Oh, and the red envelope there, you can see he was holding it for 5 minutes, and it was gold text on red background, so you could barely see it on the outside of the card. And they had here you go, all that pressure. So the second principle is leaders make it safe. And Amy Edmondson, which I love that book as well, and it's very much related to the medical context where we've seen examples of nurses not feeling safe to speak up because of the power gradient between the nurses and the surgeons, or the nurses and the doctors. But often nurses can spot things which doctors miss. Or there's one case study, I don't know if Amy Edmondson talks about it, it was definitely in Said's Black Box Thinking. Theory, I'm going to butcher this, maybe you can fill the details in. Intubating a patient, or they should have intubated the patient because the oxygen saturation was dropping, but they were so busy trying to get the tube in that they should have done a theory.
Yeah, so basically, we use this case study in a lot of the difficult airway scenarios, and basically, it's a woman who was a healthy woman, no medical problems, and she was going in for a routine operation, and there was some difficulty with the airway, which they didn't expect. They spent, I think it was about a very long time trying to get the breathing tube down, and she had a prolonged period where her oxygen saturation just dropped to the 40%. It was very low for a long time. And the nurses had the situational awareness and they could see what was going on, but they just didn't feel safe to speak up. And there's one nurse earlier on in the piece said, "Oh, I've called ICU, I've got a bed," it did, kind of saying things are not looking good. We've got a bed for her. And the surgeon went, "No, we don't need the bed, we're fine." And they just carry on doing the same thing and not realizing that the clock was ticking and time was passing. And one of the other nurses a bit later on brought out the surgical airway kit. It's a kit that we use when we're struggling to put it through the mouth, the oropharynx, you go through the neck. So she brought it out, but she's quietly put on the side. So the surgeons didn't know it was there. It was more like, "Oh, look, you might want to do this procedure, but I'm not going to tell you what to do, but here it is." Anyway, eventually they managed to get the airway in through the mouth through that way, and unfortunately there was a very long time that the patient didn't have enough oxygen, so she had brain injury and she didn't make it. So yeah, essentially the nurses were situationally aware, but they didn't feel safe to speak up, and people were not using the correct language, and it was a situation that could have been salvaged if earlier on in the piece.
Thank you, Theory. I should learn to tell that story better, but you're the doctor, so anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so spot the difference. I feel safe to speak up if I need to, compared with I am actively enabled to speak up. What do you notice between those two?
The one on the right is a fully engaged, highly talented, and person who's cognizant of the environment that they were encouraged to speak up and
Yeah.
feel confident doing so. The other one is
Mm.
I probably will say something, but only if I need to.
Yeah.
It's less confident. The other one on the right is the nirvana of where you want to see
Yeah.
engaged employees working,
W-
right?
and we know this with agile teams, we often, and you mentioned Google Aristotle, is if people feel psychologically safe and speak up, you're more likely to get those divergent viewpoints. The situational awareness of people who may have stood back for a few minutes and see things and then feel safe to speak up. So think about the nurse who got the tube kit. She's actively she said, "Well, I can speak up if I need to," but she felt she didn't need to because the surgeon was in control. Or
Is that a
the
passive
yeah,
language?
sorry.
Is that more of a passive language?
It is, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
also there's a caveat there that if I need to, so there's always a well, I didn't need to. The doctor was in the room. Why would I speak up? The doctor was there. So that's one thing. We need to actively create the environment where it's safe to speak up. And especially the kind of teams that we work with in technology, where we have a broad ethnic and gender difference and age difference and seniority difference. The junior, perhaps female, perhaps from certain cultures, are less likely to speak up if the senior person who's male and grey-haired and 6 foot tall, there is going to be a intrinsic power gradient that we need to find a way that everybody feels safe to speak up. And that's just human nature, and we need to be aware of it and be able to mitigate it.
I think also worldly wisdom teaches us that it's better for reputation to fail conventionally than to succeed unconventionally. So I think
Yeah.
if you're suggesting something that's maybe a bit different, or you're sort of seeing it from a different point of view, that can be quite risky in terms of humiliation or blame.
Yeah. So that talks to Carol Dweck's mindset, and for a leader to normalize the concept of I don't know, that's the best thing a leader can say is I just don't know. Let's find out together. And also, you mentioned Amy Edmondson, her recent book, The Right Kind of Wrong, and being safe when things go wrong. And she even gave the case study of open heart surgery in antenatal babies. And the first few times that surgeons tried it, the baby died. And that was a really poor outcome. But you can only get to the point where you can get it to work because of those failed experiments. Now, that's cold comfort for the parents of those babies, but I don't know why it's playing ahead like that. Um, but yeah, Amy Edmondson really talks about this right kind of wrong. Okay, so in business, I'm familiar with these top 3 questions. Any questions at the end of any meeting? We're good with this, right? And does that make sense? In my view, these are not expansive questions. They're binary, they're self-affirming, and they're not likely to get a commitment or divergent opinion. They're more likely to get a nod of the head, compliance, and coercion. And when anyone asks these questions, they're not deliberately or offensively being coercive, but it is kind of a micro coercion. And we need to know the way we speak impacts the way that those we lead think. So, what we need to do is find the right kind of questions to ask in the right way to get that divergent opinion and to build a safety so people feel safe to speak up and say, actually, it's a low probability. I'm not comfortable with this because of these reasons. And then we're getting a shared sense, a shared awareness. And I think,
I think that,
yeah,
I
go
think
on,
that's a
Richard.
little one. I think any questions is generally asked with the desire to get questions, but people get frustrated that they don't get any questions. So
Yeah, isn't it?
they'll end up in the thing. I think that's so rather than necessarily coercion, whereas we're all good with this, right? Does that
Yeah.
make sense? It's much more on the coercion end.
You're right. They're all binary, but some are more coercive than others. And
Yeah, I
are we
agree.
going to ship on time this Friday? Yes, boss. Because you don't have any wiggle room to say, I'm 80% certain because I think X, Y, and Z, and we don't know about
Yeah.
this or that. Here's the 7 sins of deadly questions, which go into more precise analysis of the questions. So we have to make the decision today, right? Why didn't you involve more customers? I think we've got enough to proceed. Do we all agree? And then on the other side, who carried out the research? When was this? Were there any external people involved? Do you think that we need to run this past Bob first? And are you confident you can explain this decision to the board? So and there's one more. These 7 sins of questioning are binary. Why question? Whenever you start a question with why, it's likely to put people on the back front and feel defensive. It's like the whenever you see police flashing lights in your rearview mirror and your heart jumps, that's the feeling you get. The affirming question, you're really looking for compliance, you're not looking for conversation. And then stack questions where you've got multiple questions, leading questions, dirty questions, like are you confident you can explain this decision to the board? And the aggressive questions, which get straight to what should we do? So these are the 7 deadly sins of questioning. And this is what we can ask instead. When do we need to make this decision? How did we involve customers? How certain are we that we have enough information to proceed? So you see, they start with whens, hows, and whats, and they're probabilistic. Tell me more about the research. Who needs to be involved? what should we do is a dirty question. That shouldn't be there. What will the board need to know? So these are more expansive questions, and they're more likely to invite dialogue and discussion and not and collaboration and less conformance and compliance. When leaders speak, if you're a leader, you will have an inferred influence over everybody else. So if you go into a meeting to say, this is my opinion, but I want to hear yours first, you're more likely to narrow what everyone else's opinion is towards what your opinion is. So you need to know what other people are thinking first. So leaders need to speak last. I'm thinking that this should start in April, but I want to know what you think. Okay, the first agenda and so on. People might be thinking that, oh, the boss has said April, but I think May would be better. But you won't feel safe speaking up and challenging the boss at this point. So instead, what we need to do is get the leaders to speak last. So first on the agenda is launch dates. We need to agree a starting date, and I need your input from all of this. So the boss has still got April in his mind, but he understands from the team it's possible, but May would be better because, and so on. So this invites people to speak up and talk to what they perceive. So leaders speak last and don't anchor the conversation. That's the most powerful thing we can do as leaders. There you go. We need to encourage divergence. So the first way to do that is polling, voting first. You can either use the fist to five, you can use planning poker cards. I've got probability cards here I use all the time. What's the probability? One all the way up to, that was actually a ladder leadership card. But anyway, we embrace the outliers. So again, in planning poker, you may see everybody say this is a 5, but then one person thinks it's a 13. Well, that person sees the world differently. So let's find out. Let's understand what they see. Maybe if you're in a team that you feel is starting to groupthink, appoint somebody to deliberately argue the case for the opposite of what everyone else agrees, to be a devil's advocate. And this way we can then tease out other points of view. We look at reframing it from a different perspective. So we want to encourage and invite divergence of thinking, and this will enable us to converge on different courses of action. One last case study from the Santa Fe is firefighting. And as I mentioned before, I'm ex-Navy, and when I was at sea, we would have a fire exercise every single day, and I was a firefighter, so I was number 2 behind the guy in the front. And you do a fire exercise, and then afterwards you do a debriefing, similar to a retrospective. And this actually happened on the Santa Fe. This is like the second or third day at sea. They ran a fire exercise. You need to be suited and kitted up within, I think, 5 minutes or something like that. I don't know what it is on a submarine, but you need to be ready to fight the fire in as short a time as possible because it'll be filling the compartment with smoke, and there are no doors on a submarine. You need to put that fire out quickly. And it was the same on board a surface vessel that I had. And it went horribly wrong. And in the debrief, they heard, well, they didn't recharge the thermal imaging camera. They didn't have the suits hung in the right place. They didn't have the hoses hung out properly, or the fire main wasn't ready. And they didn't do this. They. And Marquet slammed his hand on the desk and said, there's no they on the Santa Fe. For me, that was one of the most profound things of his first book, because I notice in most companies I work with, you hear the word they very often. And you might even hear it in the service industry. So you go to a hotel to check in, and on reception, if you're checking in early, she might say, or he might say, I'm sorry, your room's not ready. We haven't prepared it for you yet. If you hear them say the room's not ready, they haven't cleaned it, they haven't prepared it yet, you know in that organization there's a boundary between we and they. And what we want to try and do is change the language so cognitively we can see that we is the whole organization. There's no we or they. And that was what David mandated on board the Santa Fe. You weren't allowed to use the word they. It was always we. Replace they with we. And where's the we they boundary? And my challenge to all of you is at work tomorrow, in your next meeting, count the number of days. Timor, I think you were there. One of my last gigs at SMX. I'm sure you were there.
Yes.
And we counted it. And in that one meeting, I got bored after 25 days. I stopped counting. It's human nature. And so what if you want to create a team and culture of excellence, we need to be a we, not a they. And just being self-aware of it is enough to tune it down a little bit. So no they. There's no they on the Santa Fe. Back to the Oscars. So the next day, this was all embarrassing. Big mess up. Fool's gold. You had one job. The Oscars had an intense six-step plan to avoid envelope disaster. So PricewaterhouseCoopers went away. This cannot ever happen again. So they had a recommendation for improvement at the Oscars, and there were six. They got it down to five. What do you see with those 5 points of improvements? Ban the use of social media. Another consultant in the control room. Yeah, PwC proposed that. Cha-ching. Additional check where the envelopes are handed over. The chairman had an enhanced security role. Not sure what that means. And partners will rehearse what happens if something goes wrong. What's wrong with that pattern there, do you see?
It's all under PwC's control or influence.
Yeah, it's all tweaking top blue workers.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not changing the structure. So the actor on the stage, the presenter on the stage has authority to stop proceedings. And it's top down, yeah. Chris, sorry, you've asked a question from before. Is expected on the right as an option? Yeah. So yeah,
Oh
yeah.
no, yeah, no, that's from a while ago. I mean, on this, I think it's focused on stopping errors, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's prevention rather than like accepting
Yeah, this is a
and enabling people to kind of
if you look at every rule in your organization and every law, the reason the law's there is because somebody's broken it at some point. And then over time, you get more and more laws, and it's about error avoidance rather than achieving excellence.
yeah,
Mm.
it's working for the kind of the small percentages rather than than for the large percentages, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that talks to Carol Dweck and that mindset of excellence is the best way to avoid errors is aim to achieve excellence, not have that fixed mindset of avoiding errors. So but we're going to go back.
They've safety netted the safety net.
Yeah. So let's finally go back to the Oscars. One last slide on it. I think this is a hero of the night, Jordan Horowitz. He was the producer of La La Land. He had a roller coaster that night. He won lots of Oscars. They nearly won as many as The Two Towers, if I'm not mistaken. But then he was given the Oscar for Best Picture and then had to hand it to Moonlight. But he was because he did embody all of those principles of intent-based leadership. He did stop the clock. He said, "We lost." He said, I will be honored to hand you this Oscar to the producer of Moonlight." And so I think he was the unsung hero of the night. And I'm not going to blame Warren Beatty or Faye Dunaway or even the PwC consultant. I think it's a systemic issue and it was a structural issue and no single person. But what we can do is create an environment where Warren feels safe to speak up. And so when errors if unavoidably occur, there are mechanisms to help resolve it quickly. So to summarize, these are the 6 principles of intent-based leadership. We want to push authority to information, not information to authority. So where let the doers become the deciders. We need to balance this with tuning control based on the level of competence and clarity. So think of Dan Pink, which is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. This is a similar dynamic where once you get greater clarity through mission and people's have a greater improvement in competency, you allow people to make better and more decisions and allow them to climb the ladder. So then you can let go of the control progressively. You don't immediately do it, you have to staircase up. Leaders make it safe. We don't add stress, so we create the environments, not the people. If people are misbehaving or not performing, it's usually an environmental factor. People will behave how they are measured. So don't blame them for behaving irrationally if you measure them irrationally. Don't be good, get better. That's that growth mindset. It's okay not to know. It's okay to be curious. That's the best thing a leader can say is I don't know, and be experimental. And finally, act your way to new thinking, not think your way to new action. So back to ladder of leadership. So at the bottom in the permission-based culture in industrial age thinking, tell me what to do, permission-based. What we can do as leaders is ask the question of what do you see? What do you think? What would you like to do? And what do you intend to do? And we want to strive for 5. We want to get to the level where people tend to feel safe to say, I intend to take this course of action because this is what I think based on this was what I've seen or what I sense. We want to avoid people misunderstanding intent-based leadership of, oh yeah, I've been given the customer a 25% discount now for 2 quarters. It's too late. We want to say, I think I would like to give a discount to the client this quarter because I believe it will increase throughput and I know that they're price sensitive and we'll get the sale. And in that case, their manager to say, yep, okay, go ahead. And they become the decision evaluator. So, my friends, thank you for hanging on for the last 40 minutes. That's my name, Gareth Holebrook. You can obviously follow me on LinkedIn. I'm going to put this recording on YouTube and on it as well, 5-second plug. I'm running a workshop in 1 month's time. I know Hina and David, you've attended previous workshops where we go through this and other case studies and leave you with a toolkit of how to use intent-based leadership. So with that being said, I'm going to stop the share and ask everybody instead of asking any questions, I'm going to ask what questions do you have? And Dave, I'll start with you.
Questions in there. Sorry, there were some comments in the chat box.
Yeah.
Do you want to address those? There's one from Luke.
Yeah.
He just said about flexing the muscle. Okay, I'm practicing.
Yeah, Luke, you've got a real good point. And the problem is, so you may create at Westpac, you may have this great culture of intent. But then you get a new hire who's working for you and your team who's come from one of the other banks who's maybe not quite as enlightened as Westpac, and they will have it hardwired that learned helplessness and just tell me what to do. And if they're new to the bank anyway, they're going to be low on the ladder. So it's going to take time to show that it's safe to speak up and it's safe to say, I don't know. But psychological safety can be created through language. Dave, what's your question?
Yeah, my question was, we recently did a safety culture survey in the business, and the question, open-ended question at the end of it is, what's the biggest thing that gets in the way of having a great safety culture? And the most common answer or response was, time pressure, creating trade-offs between planning and doing the job safely and the time spent on the job. So I want to see how we can use the ladder of leadership to try and understand better, what are causing the trade-offs between time and production.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of this through. So no one cares if the software's wrong. It's usually people don't die because there's so many checks and balances before it's actually issued. But in your case, in construction, people can die quite quickly, and in Theory's case, in medicine, we can have poor clinical outcomes because we administer the wrong drug. Because
we get a lot of overcommitment to a course of action.
Yeah. So there's a great case study in medicine, which you may be familiar with. So I'll start with medicine. Dispensing errors in medicine because the nurses keep getting distracted. So one hospital, the nurses were told to wear a high-vis vest when dispensing medicine. And if you see the nurse wearing that high-vis vest, do not disturb. So
yeah, I think they were checking medication. So if you need 2 nurses to check in, if you're wearing the vest, that means you're checking and counting like morphine, whatever, or checking the drug dose. So don't disturb them if they're doing that, so that they don't make an error.
Yeah. Now, in the case of manufacturing, the andon cord is, and this is a cultural thing. So one of the reasons Toyota surpassed all of the American manufacturers in the 70s was quality. American and British cars sucked, and Japanese cars were really high performing or high quality. And one of the reasons were they were resolving the quality issue at source. So whenever there was a problem, everyone on the production line were hardwired to stop the line and address the problem immediately. And so that was an embedded cultural process in Japan. In America, the idea was at the Fremont plant in General Motors plant in Fremont, California, which is where the Tesla plant is now. They said you'd lose $15,000 a minute if you stop the line. So just keep that line rolling. So that's the kind of tension that you're talking about, that you're under pressure under time, keep it rolling, don't stop the line. And then in the 1980s, Toyota created a joint venture with General Motors. It was called NUMI, which is New Motor Manufacturing Industries. And they took all of the unionized workers from Fremont, sent them over to Toyota City, and taught them the Toyota production system, and then sent them back to California. But even then, the Japanese execs went back over and they said, well, look, there's that worker there struggling. He should have pulled the andon cord. And the exec went over with great Japanese humility and said, I'm sorry, we failed because we haven't taught you that the most paramount important thing is to stop that line, which in Toyota would happen 2,000 times a shift. It's not just once a day, it's all of the time the line would be stopping and starting. So this talks to a shift in culture, and Alcoa managed that with focus on safety events. That was in Charles Duhigg's book, Smarter, Faster, Better. Oh, sorry, Power Habits. In that if you focus on safety incidents, then your bottom line goes up as well. So this needs to be driven from the executive that safety is paramount. But I think to answer your question directly, David, and this is easy to me to say, and it's slightly glib, is we need to normalize it's safe to stop the line. It's safe to, the phrase which David used is, we have time to do this right. We don't have time to do this twice. And in terms of safety, we don't have time to resolve safety issues. We do have time to do this safely the first time. So that requires people in power to use the language, not to put people under time pressure. And I think Warren Beatty was feeling that time pressure. He didn't feel safe to stop the line.
Yeah,
So,
introducing that language should help.
Yeah. So that was a really, really good question that got me thinking, actually. So I don't know how well I've answered it. How happy are you with that?
4 out of 5. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Well,
I'm very interested in what Theory was saying about distraction, because one of our recent major incidents was where one of our people got distracted, something got missed, and then that led to bad outcomes. What is that story?
There's another case study and this is to safety, and David used it as well, and it's the Japanese railroad system. They use a system called Shisha Kanko, and it's Japanese for point and call. So if you've ever been on it, and Scotty loved this, he'd just come back from Tokyo apparently, and you see all of the Japanese train operators wearing white gloves, and they point at a lever before they pull it. And on board David's ship, he had the case of a petty officer. They went alongside, they were connecting to shore power. And the problem is when you connect to shore power, you have like 440 volts buzzing around everywhere. It can kill. And the PO accidentally made the wrong breaker, which could have caused explosions and it could have caused electric shock. And he was going to he had a disciplinary hearing for the PO who shouldn't have done it. And the PO just said, look, I'm sorry, I reached for the wrong lever. I wasn't thinking. And that happens all the time. In fact, that also was talked about as and it's early days, but that Indian crash last week, one pilot that I watched suggests that maybe instead of lifting the landing gear, he pulled the flaps, which is why it crashed. We don't know, but that's one theory. So point and call is called deliberate action, which is something David then instilled on the Santa Fe, which is before you move any lever or any switch, you call that switch 3 into off position. And it gives you a moment, there's a moment pause, so you're level 5, not level 6, before you take the action. and it gets you conscious about what you're doing. But anybody in your vicinity can go, whoa, hold, that's the shore power. Don't break that. So point and call Shisha Kanko, I think more so than Andon would be possibly something you might consider introducing. Cool.
I say something with the
Yeah.
safety aspect, Dave, because in the hospital, we obviously, safety is a big thing and people die. And for example, nurses, junior doctors, and fellows, they have different levels of competency. So nurses are not expected to perform an ultrasound scan. That some nurses can put a line and put catheters. Some people can only do basic things. So I do a lot of the tune, how competent are they will determine how much control I give up. And I do like dial it down or up depending on the situation. Like using that ladder is quite helpful at work to dial down or up of how much control I give.
That actually helps you. And we were going to talk about that where, because you're the senior consultant running that department, there's what, 100 patients? And you can't be bedside with 100 patients, right?
Yes, I can't be the eyes and ears of everybody, that's coming through the door. So I need the nurses, other doctors to be my eyes and ears. And like if it's not so busy, I try to walk them up through the ladder of leadership. So for example, I would ask them, what do you see? And then what do you think? Try and move them up. For example, a higher level trainee might say, I would like to do this, based on what I see, and I think this is what's going on. You're like, great, go ahead and do that. But some of the more junior nurses, you might need to move them up the ladder a bit more. Again, they're also saying, well, you get paid the big bucks, you're the doctor, you make the decisions. I'm not going to.
Oh, Luke, we were not aware of that in Middlemore that they use the ladder of leadership.
Mm.
Yeah, they sorry, I'm just a fan of the show because it's my kids were born at Middlemore Hospital, but it's just that they follow
Oh,
the
that's a
junior
new
doctors.
program, isn't it? Yeah, I've
Yeah,
never
it's on
seen it.
TVNZ
Yeah,
Plus.
yeah.
But yeah, they get you see these doctors as human beings and they've got ambitions, personal lives, commitments, and then they're doing 8 hours a week, and it's just amazing watching them. But they have a mentor, they have a debrief, they have a personal person following them, and there's so much humility and just my admiration for all the staff at the hospital. It's great to see. This is a reality TV show, but it's actually it's a good watch. I felt quite heartfelt by the story, and from what everyone's saying here, they do have that, not exactly the way you break it
Yes.
down, but
Well,
they
yeah.
those elements of it, they do have it. Yeah, and
Yeah,
Brilliant.
so I think we're quite
it's
good
about
in
the
that
team.
like that. Yeah, we do a lot of sims, debriefing, it's kind
Yeah,
of the same lines. Like we do get a lot of we it's a bit like the leadership, but not exactly the same. Like for example, when we run a resus, we always summarize, we try to get input from the team. Even if you're the team leader, you don't want to just be telling everybody what to do. You want to gather the team and you want people to say what they're going to do, what's their role, but you just let the people speak up and then you speak last.
yes.
So yes, it's very similar. So yeah, no, that's interesting. Good, yeah,
Cool.
good feedback. I don't work at the hospital, by the way. I work in another place, another
You
hospital.
you used to work at it 20 years ago, didn't you?
Yeah, when I was training, but not anymore.
Okay, it's 7:30 now. I'm more than happy to stay online and continue yarning with you. I'm just going to stop the recording.